What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Simple Songwriting. We are on episode 17. I'm keeping track still. One day we'll be at 467 or something, and I just won't be able to remember. But yeah, as of right now, we're on episode 17. We're going to be doing, like, we could kind of call this like the instrumental extravaganza episode, I guess. Um, Doing a whole lot of instrumental stuff with our main focus on Sandstorm by Darude. Are you excited, Aubrey? You excited to get into it?
I am.
Whoa,
I was trying to think of something clever,
you are
but I can't think of anything clever. I was gonna say I'm derused, but that sounds dumb.
Daruzed. Is that even a word? That's not a word.
Nope, nope, sure isn't.
Uh, Daroused, you mean?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and I think we'll also kind of be continuing our discussion from last week, which I thought was really fun, and we were talking about, objective metrics for music, or if you can even measure music objectively and the quality of it objectively, which is very nice. And so yeah, we thought it'd be a fun continuation of that episode would be to talk about instrumental music and like what even makes a instrumental song good. Um, so yeah, I think that's what we'll be getting into today. But before we do, Aubrey, you got anything that you've been listening to, or even we could make this also like music news too, if there's anything that you wanted to talk about from the past week.
Um. So I sent you the Forbes article that was like the top. I can't remember 36, 38
38.
metal bands. Yeah,
Yeah,
and Metallica got number one.
of course.
Um, which I think is fair.
I mean, I think like yeah, I mean Metallica. When you think about like what metal is and what it encompasses, and like you can't discount Metallica. And I know that, I feel like I've heard a lot of people give Metallica shit over the years, but I've personally never understood it. I think Metallica are some of the greatest songwriters ever. Um, and so it just makes sense to me. I mean, they wrote Master of Puppets. Like you can't
Yeah.
there isn't a metal band alive that wasn't in some way inspired, whether they even realize it or not, inspired by Metallica and what they did. And I think, even when you talk about metal as a genre and like what it encompasses, like the energy that it is and what it like what it's meant to be, Metallica is at the core of that. So yeah.
Um, I thought the list overall was pretty good. Made a lot of sense. There wasn't really anything that I looked at and was kind of like surprised by, with the exception of Slipknot, I think being like number eight.
Here, hold on. I'm pulling
Um,
it up right now as well.
yeah, I know Avenged Sevenfold was 10, and I was really glad to see them on there.
That actually surprises me, man. Yeah, I see them here. I feel like Avenged Sevenfold. It's funny because you and I have like this little running gag on here of having like a reference every time. But the funny thing is like I think Avenged Sevenfold are so underappreciated. Like it's crazy to me the quality of that band, and I don't think they really get put on lists like this very often. Like Tool's at number 9. Like I'm sorry, I think Avenged Sevenfold's a better metal band than Tool. I don't know why Tool is ahead of Avenged Sevenfold, and that might be a controversial take, but I don't care.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of hot takes that can be had about that list.
Yeah, I'm sure. Here, I'm going through. So I'm gonna list go down through it. Slayer at 8. That makes sense. Slipknot at 7.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think to say that Slipknot dethrones Slayer is like a wild statement.
in terms of greatest metal bands, honestly, I could see
Everybody
it.
knows Slayer.
Let me put it this way. I personally like Slipknot more than Slayer, so I might be biased, but I see what you're saying. Like it's tough.
It's Slayer.
I
Like I
would
don't even like Slayer like that, but it's Slayer.
Yeah, like they're kind of like they're similar to Metallica in that they're this like ubiquitous
Yeah,
thing when it comes to like they're synonymous with metal.
yeah.
Um and as huge and popular as Slipknot is, I don't know if they have the quite the same like association. I see what you're saying. Um, I will say number 6 being Ozzy Osbourne. That's interesting. Um,
Yeah,
if we were talking about like the greatest metal bands, I don't know if I would have put Ozzy Osbourne ahead of Slayer.
yeah,
Maybe Black Sabbath. Is Black Sabbath on this list?
it is, but it's like way up there.
Oh no, it's number 2. Black Sabbath's number 2.
Oh, never mind. I must have been thinking of somebody else.
Yeah, so real quick, let me name them all out and we can talk. But we got Ozzy Osbourne at number 6. Oh, hold on, did I say number 7? Number 7 Slipknot. Ozzy Osbourne at 6. Number 5 is Judas Priest.
Yeah,
Pantera at number 4. Iron Maiden at
yeah,
number 3. Black Sabbath
yeah.
at 2. Metallica at 1. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I'd put Black Sabbath at 2. I'll be honest. Like Black
I
Sabbath
think
is.
the problem
Mhm.
with not putting them at two is same thing you said about Slipknot, same thing you can say about Sabbath, or not Slipknot. The same thing you said about Metallica, you can say the same thing about Sabbath.
Right. But I will say, I think that Metallica's music has aged better than Black Sabbath's.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And
I can get
and
behind that.
I think that when we're making these lists, a lot of times it's like this really tricky thing of like, okay, they were the first to do it and they were pioneers and we owe everything to them, right? But it's like, I don't know. It's funny because it kind of gets back into our conversation of like, okay, just because you were the first to do it might not necessarily mean you were the best at it, and that someone who
Right.
else can't come along and do it better. Like Metallica was
Yeah.
absolutely inspired by Black Sabbath. So, at what point does your historical place in the genre, you know, no longer, or at what point does the music and the art itself kind of supersede your historical legacy in the genre? I think
Right.
it's maybe
Right.
man, that's an episode. We should do an episode on that. I think that'd be a hell of an episode. Seriously, like, because I think you get these lists of like greatest guitar players of all time, and I swear, almost every time I see one of those lists, you got like Jimi Hendrix at number 2 or 3, or most of the time he's actually at number 1, and I always
Yeah.
dispute him. I'm sorry, y'all. Jimi Hendrix is not the greatest guitarist of all time, and that is a controversial statement, but he is not. I I think Eddie Van Halen. Now that an argument could be made that he's the greatest guitarist of all time. We could have a conversation about that, but not Jimi Hendrix. But with that said, the things that he did and the sounds that Jimi Hendrix created and his creativity on the guitar, phenomenal, especially for the time. Like he was a pioneer, but I wouldn't put him above Eddie Van Halen on a list ever. So yeah, we should put that to the list. I'd love to have a conversation about that. But anyway, sorry, I know we got off on a little tangent there.
Yeah. Other than that, Lady Gaga released the jazz album.
Oh really?
Yeah, it apparently actually came out like the last week of September. I just missed it until this past week.
I I haven't heard anything about this. The album's out.
Yep,
Harlequin?
came out. Yep.
Yeah, it came out like 2 weeks ago. Aubrey, I haven't heard a single word about this. Wait, this is probably associated with Joker 2.
I think part of it is,
Is this just
but
like the
I don't
Joker 2 soundtrack or something?
wouldn't think
She plays
so.
Harley Quinn in Joker.
Correct, yeah.
I know she had like Die with a Smile with Bruno Mars a few weeks ago. Yeah, I think the problem is that the new Joker movie is just getting slaughtered.
Oh, really?
Nobody likes that movie, dude. It has a worse score than Morbius. You know about
I don't even know
Morbius?
Morbius. No.
Never mind that. Morbius is like a phenomenal flop, and it's doing worse than that. That's pretty bad, dude. Um, yeah, I forgot you don't really watch superhero stuff.
Ooh,
Yeah, no, the first Joker is pretty good. It's actually a solid like standalone movie. This new Joker, I haven't seen it, but apparently it is just absolutely terrible. So I don't know. Interesting times. But yeah. Uh,
That's pretty much all I got.
okay, cool. Um, I honestly I haven't really listened to anything. It's been crazy week at work, and then I had a super busy weekend. We went and visited my girlfriend's family, so I don't think I've got anything on my list. I did listen to our songs that we were. Oh, you know what? I did listen to a little bit of EDM. I listened to Black Tiger Sex Machine over the weekend because my girlfriend and I were trying to remix Hot to Go by Chapel Roan. So I was getting a little bit of inspiration from other EDM artists that she recommended to me. So that was fun. But aside from that, nothing new. Cool. All right. So, what do you say we get into this bad boy? All right. So before we start, just so the listeners know, and I'll put this in the description, but we actually have 4 songs that we're kind of bringing to the table today to talk about. Our main song and what we're going to kind of use as like our foundation of the conversation is Sandstorm by Darude. Uh, we wanted to pick an. So, actually, hold on. Let's back it up. This episode, we wanted to discuss instrumental music. And, you know, in the last episode, we were talking a lot about themes and storylines in songs and like lyrics and how those can be, presented in different ways and whether or not some ways are better than others and all of that, right? But we decided an interesting, next step in that conversation, which was essentially about how to analyze music or whether you can objectively analyze the quality of music. The next step in that conversation would be talking about instrumental music and what happens. Like, can a song be good if it doesn't have a story? Um, and so we wanted our main song to be something that everybody knows, everyone's pretty familiar with, and that we both think is a really good song. Uh, but it's not like some super deep masterpiece or anything like that. So Sandstorm by Darude kind of came up, and it's like it's probably one of the most famous instrumental songs ever that isn't associated with like a video game or a movie soundtrack, and that was something that we specifically wanted to be off limits in this conversation. Correct me if I'm wrong, Aubrey, but I think it's because those songs have context built into them. Yeah. Oh, hold on. You are not showing up on Discord. Say something now.
Yep.
There you are. Okay. I basically just stare at our like volume meters the entire podcast now and make sure that they're good so that we don't have the audio glitches that we've had in prior episodes. So anyway, yeah. So the problem is that like a character theme for a movie soundtrack or a video game soundtrack, it comes built in with like meaning and purpose with it and context because the character has their own personality and story that they would go on, which would influence what the music does, right? We wanted to take all of that out. There's no context, there's no, it's not a soundtrack for somebody. It is simply a piece of instrumental music, and how do you rate that, or how do you talk about that or analyze it? I believe that that's kind of our intent. And so Sandstorm will be the main song we talk about, but we also have a few others. And the reason I want to mention this to y'all is I think y'all should go and listen to them all so you can, be familiar with the conversation at least. So the other songs that we picked are Tender Surrender by Steve Vai, Bad by Polyphia, and Strobe by Deadmau5. So go check those out. Strobe is like 10 minutes,
11.
11 minutes. But it's definitely worth it. And I think it'll help y'all understand the conversation a little bit more because I think we're gonna go a little bit all over the place in terms of instrumental music. So cool. All right, so how do we kick this off, Aubrey? I mean, I guess trying to pick up a little bit
Um,
from last time.
yeah, so I think at least my thought process, because I was the one that suggested Sandstorm and I was the one that picked Strobe, was kind of tying in last week's discussion of objectively measuring music, um, I think my thought process was to just kind of go down to like the bare essentials or the bare basics. And what better way to do that than I think music without words?
Yeah.
Um, and trying to pick a couple different, I don't want to say eclectic, because there's tons of different instrumental types out there, but very different types of instrumental um, songs to kind of talk about them all and compare them all, I guess, a little bit and kind of pick out some similarities and some differences and I guess somehow tie that back into whatever our conclusion's gonna be.
Well, yeah, I think, yeah, I agree with everything you said. The goal here. So last time we were talking a lot about like themes, and we brought in like the Dido song and compared that to Katy Perry, and like this presentation of your theme I think is better than this presentation of your theme, right? And there was a big conversation about lyrics and you know what are dumb lyrics. Like I personally think that in the Katy Perry song when she talks about like won't give me your password, what you trying to hide, it's like that's stupid. I think that those are dumb lyrics, and I think that you could take that theme. Katy Perry's theme on the last on Truth was I want to know the truth even if it hurts. And it's like you can present that theme in a lot of really interesting ways, and I feel like she chose a really poor way to do that. And so, and specifically with her lyrics, because I actually, it's funny because I did the breakdown last night, so I still have that song fresh in my mind, and it's like the music actually is pretty good, and I'm not even gonna critique like the vocal melodies or the music, and she even has like a full story in that song. It is simply just the lyrics being kind of lame, and the way that she presents her story, it's very underwhelming to me. So with that said, I think that's where we got into like well, what makes one presentation of lyrics better than another presentation of lyrics and all of that. But then we, as the conversation went on, I think we were like, well, how do you, because here's the thing, music is more than poetry, or music is a separate thing than poetry, right? And singing and songwriting as a singer is not the same as poetry. And you could be poetic, but there's so many other elements. There's your melody, your rhythm, the way you sing it, the octave that you sing it in, the passion that you sing it. There's all these other elements beyond just the words that make a singer, right? And so boiling it down to its barest components, it's like, well, how do you even analyze like music? How do you say that one melody is better than another, or vice versa, right? And I think, I'm not. Here's the thing: we were at a little bit of a disagreement last time, but my position is that there are absolutely melodies that are better than other melodies, and you can have, you know, music that is better than other music. And I don't know. I think maybe our discussion will be: is that possible, or is that a thing that you can, figure out rationally, right?
We're gonna find out.
We're gonna find out. So let's start with Darude. Let's get in, or Sandstorm by Darude. Let's kind of, well, actually, before we talk about it, do you have a little bit of background that you'd like to give just for anyone who hasn't heard it? Most people would have heard this song. Actually, let
What
me.
was the thing?
What was
Go
that?
ahead, sorry.
I was
No, no,
gonna.
go ahead. I was gonna say. Go ahead, go
Jeez
ahead.
Louise. I was gonna say let me play a little bit of it because everyone's probably heard it and you should listen to it before now. But just in case you haven't, here's what it sounds like. Oh, I have to reset Spotify. Here we go. That's Sandstorm. Most people have heard it.
Yeah.
So now what were you
Um,
gonna say?
yeah. So, I mean, basically, Sandstorm is instrumental techno song, whatever. I'm not gonna get in all the intricacies about that. By the
Actually,
Finnish,
synth
yeah,
pop.
nope, nope, not here for it. By the Finnish DJ Darude. I really hope we're saying that right. Um,
Darude.
It was actually the lead single from his debut studio album, Before the Storm, which I would be lying to you if I've said I've listened to that album. I have not.
Yeah,
Um, it, it was originally released in 1999, then re-released in 2000 to many other countries. Um,
here, 1 second.
and yeah,
Hold on. Darude. It's more like Darude.
but
There you go. Sorry.
no, 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 you're good. I feel like that's all the big important things. Wikipedia says it's an instrumental trance composition. Whatever. Techno.
I would classify it as shoegaze. No. Yeah, so everyone pretty much knows this song. It's like kind of a classic little dance song. You know, so I think, yeah, you did mention this to me, and you texted it over to me, I think, and I thought this was actually perfect because one of the things we talked about last time was like vibes, like vibe songs that you just want to vibe to, right, and not use your brain.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I feel strongly about is that you can have your vibe song, but it can still be interesting and good, right? And I think this song is actually a pretty good example of that. Um, there's a lot going on in this song. It's the first off, the melody's quick. Like that's a fast little melody, right? It's not simple. So I think like and then on top of that, it's pretty complicated too. Like it goes all over the place. Like it starts hitting all these little random notes in the middle of it in like the quote unquote chorus, right? And so yeah, I think it's there's a lot of and as it's funny as I was listening through the whole song, there's actually a lot of really smart like musical flow decisions made in this song. Like for example, they add like this bass sound to the second chorus. Here, let me play it for you. So this is the first chorus. Like cool, that sounds, that's what we're used to hearing. But then listen to this and listen to like the bass layer. You hear that boom 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 boom.
Mm.
And so it's like that's cool. Like he put work into that and made sure that the two choruses, because there's really only two choruses in this song, he made sure that they are distinct from each other, and that's effort, right? That's more effort than a lot of pop artists today will put into their songs. So I think but so anyway, point being is like there's these things that he does to make this song interesting throughout the whole song, but uh it's still a vibe, and it's still, you can still relax. Well, in this song in particular is meant to be like an intense vibe, like you're just dancing, and this would be like dance club type vibes, techno dance, whatever. And so yeah, I think that this is why this song probably stood out, is that it's fun, it's energetic, it's got kind of a catchy hook that da 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 da. So I think that it, compared to a lot of other techno songs I've heard, I'd say it's better. Do you
Yeah,
think?
I can't say that I've listened to a lot of just quote unquote just straight techno songs. Um,
Mhm.
like artists that I'm familiar with in that area is largely Dead Mouse and Skrillex. Um,
Yeah.
maybe one or two others I can't think of off the top of my head, and I would not consider Dead Mouse or Skrillex techno. But
Nah.
again, without getting into all the nitty gritty of the different subgenres,
Nah, they're
um,
EDM, right?
yeah, yeah, EDM and dubstep.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, for me, I don't know if you have any necessary like standout moments in your life, but I feel like this was played at like every school dance.
Oh yeah.
When we were like growing up, and for whatever reason, this was just like the song that everybody
Oh yeah.
like
Everyone played
would
this song.
bop to. Yeah,
Yeah, no, this was like the song in seventh grade, right? Like sixth grade, seventh grade. It was just everywhere. It is one of those things where like a lot of people might not even know the name of the song, but everyone's heard this song, at least from our generation. I don't know, these new skibbity toilet kids might not, but yeah, it's definitely Well, so that's the thing, right? Like let's maybe dive in a little bit. Like, is this a would we consider this a good song? Like, would we consider this like, yeah, this is good?
Um, I mean, I would. So, like, kind of segueing a little bit from last week of, do I think this is a good song? Yes. I will admit partial bias of some nostalgia here, probably.
Yeah.
I literally haven't listened to this song in probably like 10 years until last week.
You know,
Um,
I don't think I had ever heard this song in its entirety until this week.
um, but like it still made me like, I was in my car going, you know,
Yeah.
but I don't I don't necessarily think it pushes any boundaries or anything. I think it's a vibe, which I think a lot of more of the electronic-y it tends to be. Maybe that might not be an appropriate statement. I'll have to ponder that.
Well,
But
so that's the here's the funny thing about like instrumental music, right? Is like when you think about just sound and like all the things you can do with sound, I feel like a lot of instrumental music walks this line between being like as wild and I wouldn't even use the word boundary pushing. It's more like like testing the waters, kind of like they want to see how far they can push it without becoming just an incoherent mess, right? And what I mean is like you can listen to like a Skrillex song or like an EDM song, and it's almost like overwhelming, right? With all the crazy sounds that you'll be hearing, but then it'll still have like a groove and a bop to it, right? Like you can rock your head to it. And you know, but then you can also have songs that are like very like the retro wave stuff. I don't know if you've seen on YouTube the girl studying, the live playlist of the girls studying. Do you know what I'm talking about?
no idea.
It's like this live playlist. It's a live stream that's been going on for like 7 years. And it's just this they keep just playing like they can keep refreshing it with new songs, but they basically play like these little tunes, like retro wave, relaxing music to study to. Essentially, it's like a study playlist, but it's live, and it's this girl just like writing in her book, and it's been going on for literally like years and years. And so, at any moment in time on YouTube, there's probably like a couple thousand people listening to that, like tuned into that live stream, and it's just meant to be this kind of relaxing synthy music. I could probably even pull it up while we're chatting. Um, but yeah, it's so there's like these different purposes for like different for instrumental music, right? And coming back around like vibes, like there's these different vibes that instrumental music tries to capture, but then it's I don't know. I mean, that's where we get into like is so think of maybe here's a good way to put it. Like, would we consider this song like good compared to like Avenged Sevenfold songs? Like if Avenged Sevenfold released this song, would we be like okay with that? Or how do you think you would feel if you had
Um,
never heard it before?
I think I think I would enjoy the song. I would think it'd be very weird coming from Avenged Sevenfold, but I think the two, you know, I think they're just too different to really compare.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. I see what you're saying. And that's where like so okay, one of the first things that I have on my little template is the purpose of a song. And I brought this up in some of our earlier episodes of like I think it's important to look at what it is and like or what it's trying to be or what it's supposed to be. And maybe a better way to explain this is like a movie, right? So if I'm making a comedy and it doesn't make people laugh and people don't really find it funny, but people actually think it's like a great drama, or actually let's switch it. I'm making a horror movie but nobody is scared by it and everyone's just laughing at it, and it actually turns out to be like a really funny, terrible horror movie. It's like, have I made a bad movie? What do you think about that? What would your answer be to that?
I think, I mean, no. I think you missed your mark, or somebody, a populace, a fan base,
Hmm.
found something else they enjoyed about it instead. But I don't think it's a bad movie as long as you have fans.
Yeah. So then, what if it was like a horror movie, but nobody got scared and everybody actually was just really bored throughout the whole movie and it wasn't very good? Or like they didn't enjoy it very much. Would you then think that was, would we then consider that a bad movie?
E- e- Yeah, yeah, I guess, right?
I think so. And so the kind of where I want to, the reason why I want to say that is like when you have, like, when you have this art, you usually have a purpose for that you're making it for, right? So you can't, the reason why I bring this up is because you made me think about like there's these different reasons for different listening to different types of music, right? So if I'm at a rave, I don't want to listen to soft, you know, retro wave study music, right? Like that's just not, I don't want that to be the vibe. I want to dance. I want to have intense music played, or at a metal show, right? Like you can't play like jazz at a metal show unless it's like a jazz chord breakdown or some shit, you know?
Avenged Sevenfold might disagree.
Maybe so. Uh, but in general, and I think Avenged Sevenfold's like the exception because they're so willing to try new things and the fans are willing to hear different things, right? But
Yeah.
it's all about the context, right? Like, what am I, what is what are we trying to accomplish here? Like, are we making do we want to make a heavy song and then they make that heavy song and it's actually just sounds stupid and bad? Or did we want to make a dance song and nobody can dance to it, right? Like, kind of bringing it back around to our conversation of like, I think that if you were trying to make a dance track and nobody can dance to it, it's probably not going to be a very good song. And I think that you could figure out why nobody could dance to it and pick that apart. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
So then, well, maybe let's get a little more specific. What do you think goes into a dance song and what do you think would like, you know what we should have done? I now I'm thinking about this. We should have had like a bad dance song. Soldier Boy.
A
Um,
great dance song.
I know it is. It's hard. Well, and that's the funny thing. It's like hard to think of a bad dance song because there's probably thousands of them, but we just don't know them because we don't dance to them, right?
Right.
Um, man, I don't know. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? I feel like I'm kind of all over the place right now.
Yeah, so I think that so to answer your question, what goes into a good dance song is one, something you can dance to reasonably, um, and I think has to have like good energy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think an interesting thing for this episode would be comparing Sandstorm, Strobe, and your two choices, and seeing, like I think the important thing more so is to focus on how they're both instrumentals, but in very different ways, you know.
I think that that makes sense.
Or they're all four instrumentals, not both, but you know what I mean.
So let's start with comparing Sandstorm to Strobe because I think they're both, they're both electronic music songs.
Yeah.
They're similar in that vein, but also they are, well, they're very different in other ways too. So like to me, Strobe, that's almost like it made me think of sitting at the library studying and like something I would turn on
Um,
while I was like reading or working on an assignment, like typing an
yeah,
essay or something, right?
yeah. Um, I think I think that's an interesting observation for a couple reasons. So one, going back to what you said about how if you went to a concert like this, like you would want dancing music.
Hmm.
When I saw Dead Mouse, God, hate to say this, um, like over a decade ago,
Dang.
um, he finished at that point in time, he was finishing his set with Strobe.
Yeah.
Um, I was in,
A decade
uh,
ago?
yeah, it was like 12 years ago.
Yeah.
Um,
Old man.
yeah, yeah, it was freshman or sophomore. Anyway, 10, 12 years ago.
Hmm.
And I think finishing this his set, which was like hours long,
Right.
and it was a great end to the set and kind of like was a nice calm to the storm, I guess, like the storm is over. Here's your kind of sunshine breaking through the clouds moment.
Yeah.
Um, when I was writing a bunch of articles for my fish blog stuff, I would very regularly put on Dead Mouse. I don't think I could write articles with Sandstorm playing in the background.
Right.
Um, the Strobe specifically also would be like my chill song. Like after like a soccer game or something, I'd come home and just like decompress in absolute darkness to this song,
Yeah.
and then resume my day. Uh,
Dramatic. Prince of Darkness.
well, it's just a nice. I think it's a nice calming song, and even though it does have like its upbeat pickup moments, it's not. It's like it walks that line, right?
Yeah. No, I know exactly because
Um,
it's not like it's just constantly building up. It actually does like I wouldn't call it explode, but it does release that tension, towards the end of
yeah,
the song. And there is a moment where it's not even like rave music, but it is like there is a drum beat and the music is going and you can actually like bob your head and get into it.
yeah, yeah. Kind of like a cool down after a workout kind of thing.
Right. Exactly. So,
Um,
you know what's funny?
which you don't get with Sandstorm.
Real quick, this is what
Yeah.
something that I find that I wanted to actually mention. I thought about this the other day. Instrumental music, one of the things that's kind of interesting about it is that it's almost made. This is gonna sound a little corny, but it's almost made to be like the soundtrack to your life. Like, do you know what I
That is
mean?
very corny.
It is super corny, but I mean it in almost like this very literal sense of like you want like well you turn it on whenever you're in a certain mood for something or you want to hear something. I find that like very little I don't think it's very often that I would go and listen to an instrumental artist who is pushing boundaries. I think Polyphia is one of the first bands that I've listened to that does that, and that's just because
Yeah.
what they do is so high level in terms of instrumentation. I don't think I would enjoy Polyphia as much if I didn't play guitar. Um, you know so there is that aspect to it, but like when you think about what instrumental music is, it really is kind of like what you decide to like, if you're in a movie, right, like it is the music that you decide to play for your life. And because there's no lyric, there's no story, like you're not actually like you're not it sounds, again, this all sounds really corny. I recognize that, and I don't mean it to be corny, but it's like when you're listening to songs with lyrics, you're listening to somebody else's story, or you're experiencing what somebody else has to say, and what they say might be relevant to what you're saying, and that can still be that soundtrack. But instrumental music is quite literally like soundtrack music that you decide to play for your own life to an extent. So like you said, I don't want to listen to Darude while I'm studying because it's distracting. I want to listen to that when I'm dancing because that's the music that I want to dance to, right? Um, so maybe the point I was getting that is like, what if somebody makes an instrumental song that has no real life application to it? I feel like, you know, I don't know. I think while we're talking about this, I'm just spitballing all over the place.
Yeah, but I think the the soundtrack to your life is, I think, interesting. Not anything I've considered, um, because I would find it very hard. I'm thinking about your song specifically, that you picked, the Steve Vai song. What was the name of that one again?
Tender surrender.
Tender Surrender. Yeah. I would have a hard time finding a place for that song, I think, in a day in my life. Um, which is not to say that obviously other people can't find a place for it, but I think that, you know, the Levi song specifically is just, I think,
Well,
in a sense, with certain instrumentals, like you can still tell a story without using words.
yes. So that okay, let's talk about that aspect real quick because that's why I chose that song is to show that you can have a story with a song. And that's what that song is. I mean, it can I'm almost like let's be real, it's probably about sex. But like
It could be just an intimate encounter.
if that's what you want to call it,
What does Wikipedia have to say about that?
about tender surrender, I don't think
Yeah,
I don't think that song's on Wikipedia. I don't think that song's popular enough to have
I thought that was an interesting choice that you picked. That Steve Vai song. Not that I'm super familiar with Steve Vai stuff, but I feel like he has more well-known songs.
that's actually one of his most popular songs, dude. That's a
Really,
very popular
outside of
Steve
the
Vai.
Halo 2 theme.
Well, yeah, I mean that's obviously like that's huge. That it's like his most popular songs are like "For the Love of God," "Tender Surrender," "Bad Horsey."
Yeah, I know Bad Horsey.
Yeah, he's but "Tender Surrender" is really popular. I used to know how to play all of "Tender Surrender" at one point. Um, I really like "Tender Surrender" because I think it does show that like music can't like just the music can tell a story. And kind of going back a little bit to last week when we talked about Dido, right? Where you have the
Right.
verses are like minor key, and then you switch over to the choruses, and it's very major key and happy because she's saying thank you to the person who brightens up her day. It's like she tells that story not just with the lyrics and the vocals, but also with the music, and so you can do a lot with just music. And when you're an instrumental artist, you're kind of forced to make that work, right? Because you don't have lyrics to tell your story, so you have to tell the story with your music. Um, that was the main reason I chose that. I think that sometimes people don't think of music like that, and even with songs that have vocals and lyrics, right? You can still have these musical sections that tell a story, like Cosmic, for example, right? Like when that guitar solo comes in Cosmic, it's like that's not a meaningless guitar solo. It's not it serves a purpose to the story, about like losing your loved one or like moving on from a loved one or however you want to interpret Cosmic. I'm talking about Cosmic by Avenged Sevenfold, for the listeners. So I think that element of like music can have be so we've talked about like vibe music and how it is just kind of like it's like a soundtrack to your life, but music alone can also tell a story and influence like what you're saying in a song, but also just be its own thing. Like you can have a musical shift. uh here a good example of this would be Death by Avenged Sevenfold off of Life Is But a Dream, where he's singing these really pleasant lyrics in the verse, and then once he finishes the verse, this like impending doom guitar and tuba come in, boom 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 boom, like everything he's saying is very tragic and scary, but he doesn't say anything that is actually tragic and scary. So that interplay between like happy lyrics and happy music, and then like he stops singing and then just these really dark horns and guitars come in. Um i i think that tells the story. That's part of telling the story. So yeah, I just think that that's an important thing to note, and it's something that I like to see in songs is when the music actually complements and benefits the themes of the story as opposed to just kind of being there. Um, so yeah, what do you think? This is maybe a good question.
Hmm.
Which song? I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. Let me just say it bluntly. What do you think is better? Which do you think is the better song, Strobe or Tender Surrender?
Um,
See, I think this is
hmm,
where it gets interesting because,
yeah. I mean, I think they're both good songs, but for very different reasons.
right.
Um, I had never heard Tender Surrender, or if I had, it's been a very long time. I've only heard it like once. Or if I've listened to Strobe a bajillion times. And it's very familiar. And like I said, some nostalgia there for me, you know.
And see,
But
I'm the exact opposite. I've been listening to Tender Surrender since I was in middle school, and I had
I
never heard
think
Strobe.
I think if I were to sit down and hear them both for the first time ever, like today, I think I would pick Strobe still.
Hmm.
Um, but more so because I think I just enjoy the journey that that song takes you on, that Tender Surrender doesn't really have. And I think there is a journey or a story told in Tender Surrender.
Hmm.
It's just not one I can connect with personally.
That's super interesting. I I understand what you're saying. I think I would still pick Tender Surrender, but that's just because. So let me maybe come at it from like my perspective. I think that Tender Surrender, like the composition itself, like the notes that he chooses, not just the guitar, like guitar playing, right? Like obviously I'm a
Right.
guitarist and I like guitar playing, but like beyond just looking at it as a guitarist, I think like his composition is so intricate and well crafted, like a marble statue. But it's
Yeah.
it's I love that. And while I like Strobe, I enjoyed it. There was this point where I was like, okay, you know, like I get it, and I think that that's kind of interesting. Like, what do you think about that?
So I think the big difference is I think it just comes down to the big difference between you and I. So I, historically speaking,
Mhm.
not a big fan of like quote unquote instrumental music that's not electronic, unless it's a soundtrack. Um,
Yeah.
the only person I've really listened to a lot of um that is closer to that Steve Vai situation is Paul Gilbert.
You
Um,
real quick,
go
you,
ahead.
you know what's really funny? You mentioned Paul Gilbert when we were texting about it, and
Hmm.
I'm gonna keep it real with you. Paul Gilbert, he's an incredible guitarist, but I have always hated his music. I cannot get into his music. I
Um,
I just think his music so like his music is so sterile to me. Like it sounds like he's just playing like guitar exercises really really fast. And
yeah,
versus like
I
Steve
mean,
Vai where it's like there's melody and flow and
yeah,
structure.
yeah. I mean, I can get behind that statement.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry, what were you going to say though?
what I was gonna say is I think, I think in general in our life, I think the big difference between us to note here, which probably leads us to our conclusions, is, you know, you being a heavily guitar-minded person, I think am of course gonna be more prone to picking Steve Vai, whereas most of the time I'm listening to music, I definitely think I fall more into the vibe category,
Mhm.
um, which lands me in Strobe.
So let's I think this is actually a good place to bring in Bad by Polyphia.
Yeah.
So here's why I chose that song because it's really weird. The notes and the riff, like especially the main riff, It's very weird and unorthodox, but that is actually a song that I vibe to, and that's why I picked it. Um, I think so. Let's like, well, I guess the point I'm getting at is maybe before we get into bad, maybe I jumped into that too early. Let me talk about what you were just saying. So, do you think that there is a way for us to come to a resolution, or like, how do you think we could compare these two songs? Okay, let me get to the core of it. What do you think that there is an objective way to like say, okay, well, what can we look at in these two songs to measure the quality and compare them? I think
Um,
that's what interests me, right? So, sorry, I know I'm
yeah,
thinking and I'm talking while I'm
yeah, yeah,
thinking,
yeah.
but my big thing is I'm like, okay, I hear we've got these two songs and they're very very different types of songs, right? But is there
Right.
some way to tell which one's better? Is there some way to like try to figure that out? Like, you know, if we're talking, like, if we had to pick a top five greatest instrumental songs list and we came down to, or top four instrumental songs list, like, and we had to agree, like, what is the order of these four songs from best to worst, and we had to hash it out. Like, maybe that's what we
Mhm.
should do. We should try to order these songs best to worst because they're so different. Um,
Right.
I think that's what interests me, and that's what I want to try to figure out. Like, what makes this song better than another song or worse than another song?
Yeah. So I think to answer your question, um,
It's interesting, right?
yeah. So I think the only way you can do that is if you provide a context for how you want to grade them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think you can just grade them as entities because you wouldn't listen to Strobe and um, the Steve Vai song "Tender Surrender" if you were looking for the same thing because they give you different things. Like if you were to compare Strobe to three other songs that were similar to Strobe, I think that could be done
Right.
as far as ranking those. But it's kind of like, you know,
It's like
comparing.
it's like comparing a steak to a cake.
I was gonna, yes, I was gonna bring back steak.
Yeah.
Um, if you want something sugary sweet and your choice is between steak and a cake, well, of course you're gonna pick your cake. If
Right.
you want beef and not sugary sweet, you're gonna pick your steak.
Right.
Um, so I don't think you can compare them to each other. I think you can ask yourself individually, is there merit in both of these songs, and what is those merits, and do they share similar merits but in different levels in the sense of like this is an example and not how I think a good way to go about it, but like okay, like does Strobe have an intro? Yes. Does Levi song have an intro?
Eh,
Yes or no? Like,
kind of.
and
Yeah. It was,
and and for my example, we could say yes, they both have intros. Can we compare the two intros? Yeah. But again, I think it has to be the context of what the song is trying to achieve or make you feel.
right. I see what you're saying, and it's interesting.
Um, because again, if you walk in to go back, going back to your movie situation of like if you're going into a comedy and then it turns out it's a horror movie, or you think you're going into a comedy and it turns out to be a horror movie or something else. I did that with Knives Out. I thought Knives Out was going to be a comedy movie and it
Yeah.
was not. And I was like, "Oh, this is not what I expected."
Uh,
So I
I
had to like mentally shift my brain.
yeah.
And I still thought Knives Out was a great movie. I just thought it was a pure comic, like a comedy movie, not I don't technically know what it is, like a drama thriller type situation.
I think it was supposed to be like murder mystery. I hated that movie, bro.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a different
I thought
conversation.
it Yeah, that is definitely a different conversation. But I didn't think it was a bad movie. I just had to alter my expectations. I did the same thing with Fires of the Rubicon. I thought it was going to be something very different
Yeah.
than what it actually was, and I had to like severely alter my thought process because I was like, this is not what I was expecting. That doesn't make it bad. I just thought I was expecting something very different.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. So maybe okay, so let's think about it, right? Like so one of the reasons I bring like I'm diving so far like into this is because I don't think people really discuss music like this in terms of, well, is this song better than the other song and how do we compare them? So I do agree with you, like there are these different like uh clusters of genres and purposes for songs, and it is very difficult or maybe even impossible to compare like, you know, some big epic, you know, synth wave track like Strobe, compare that to something like a guitar extravaganza song like Tender Surrender, right? I think that that comparison is very difficult. Um, but I think that's something that interests me, and I don't know, I'm stuck on that. But I see what you're saying. 'Cause, so maybe it's okay. I think it's easier to talk about movies and then apply it to songs. So like, can you do you think you could compare a comedy movie to a horror movie?
So I think movies are a little so like can you compare them? Yes. But I think movies are a little bit different because I think there's more rules in general when making a movie. Because in theory, all movies share something in common, which is like a plot theoretically and characters and like, movie tropes. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, but I would argue back that all music has sounds and instruments and melodies. And like so like for example, you could write a movie that subverts that by having like no characters or no dialogue or something, right? Like Hush, that movie Hush.
Yeah,
You know, so you could have like a movie with no dialogue and that subverts your expectations. And so you could have like a song that is experimental and doesn't have anything but like drums and vocals or something, or drums and bass, right?
yeah,
So you can, I think that there's like these stereotypical metrics that, or these uh things that you have, and then if you really want to experiment with it and like remove those basics, like remove plot, my movie is subversive because it doesn't have a plot, you know. It's like, okay,
yeah,
so I would kind of disagree a little bit with what you're saying, but I get it.
yeah.
So like, okay, maybe what about this? What if the way that you compare a comedy movie to a horror movie is to
Mhm,
not compare them? You mentioned this earlier, and maybe this is a good way to go about it. Compare the horror movie as a horror movie, like to other horror movies, and see where it ranks there, and then compare
mhm.
the comedy movie as a comedy movie, or rank it as a comedy movie, and then see like, is the horror movie better at being horror than the comedy movie is better at being comedy?
Right.
That's tough, man. That's tough. Because then you have to understand both.
Yeah,
So bringing it back to Strobe and Tender Surrender, it's like, okay, if we had to compare these two songs, let's try to do it like that. Like, is Strobe a great, like, where does Strobe sit in terms of like these long synthwave tracks that are meant to be like experienced in a very
mhm,
like quiet environment, like they're a very like personal experience that you go through,
yeah,
versus like Tender Surrender, which is meant to be this very complicated you know, guitar virtuoso track. It's like, huh. I'm just thinking about that now. It's interesting. It's I so let's real quick, let's step back.
yeah,
So if our
yeah.
goal here is to try to figure out like, I think the goal is to learn to objectively analyze music. and determine like, is this good or is this bad, right?
Right.
So I think what's interesting is like, I think that that's the first step, and so we can look at like Tender Surrender and Strobe, and I think I would speak for us both when I say like both of those songs are good songs. They're pretty good songs.
Yeah.
I don't know if you like how much you like Tender Surrender. I think Tender Surrender is an excellent song, and I also thought Strobe was an excellent song.
I will say of the 4 songs, I would put Tender Surrender in 4th place of the 4 songs we picked. But
Interesting.
I don't think it's a bad song.
Okay.
It's just of the 4, my least favorite.
So interesting. Let me come back to that real quick. Uh,
Yeah.
so the point being is like, if our goal is to learn to analyze these songs and find some way to like rank them, and I think this was the point I was trying to get to earlier, but I don't know. Is it's funny when we do this podcast, sometimes you have to talk for like an hour before you really start getting like the good.
Well, there's lots of things to,
uh,
you know, sometimes we just kind of figure it out as we do it.
Yeah, and I mean even this discussion is like, it's kind of building on our last week's discussion. Um
Yeah.
but the point I was getting at, and I think this is the point I was trying to make earlier, is that this is where the purpose of the song comes in. This is where you have to like understand, well, what is this song for? Like, why was it made? What is the context of it? Like, what is it trying to be? And I think we sort that out with genres. Like, that's what we typically do with, you know, genre. Like, oh, this is a metal song, or oh, this is a country song. But I actually don't like that. And that's why in my little template, I have purpose before genre, because you can have a somber country song and you can have a somber metal song. You can have a happy pop song and you can have a happy alternative song. Or like, for example, Katy Perry's whole like "The Truth Can Set You Free" or whatever, or the "I Want to Know the Truth Even If It Hurts Me." Like, you can have a song about like investigating your ex-boyfriend or something, and that can be a pop song or a metal song or a country song or a jazz song, right? So I think like, maybe to bring it full circle, I think that like the vibe or the story or the purpose of the song is more important than the genre itself. I guess that's maybe the point I'm getting at.
Um,
Or sorry, that's like, if you're going to objectively analyze a song or try to
right,
it,
right, right, right.
that's the first thing. You have to identify, well, what is the song trying to do, or what is it
Yeah,
made to do?
yeah. And I think you're right in everything you said as far as genres. Like you can have a happy, sad, a version of any genre.
Right. It's kind of funny because when you think about genres in movies, they're much more like descriptive about what the movie is. Like a drama, you know what that is. It's going to be tense, it's going to probably be emotional, sad, maybe a little happy in moments, but it's going to be this like roller coaster, right? Versus like uh something like a thriller, it's probably going to be very tense the whole time, and then like subtly building to a climax at the end where it just goes crazy, like
Right.
Silence of the Lambs or something, right? um
Yeah.
so I feel like genres in movies are actually way more accurate to what the movie will give you versus like genres in music, because there's, like I said, like I could say, oh, Metallica's metal, and then I turn on uh Nothing Else Matters, and they're like,
Right.
what? Or like Avenged Sevenfold, right? Like, oh, Avenged Sevenfold's
Dear
metal.
God.
Yeah, listen to Dear God or Ordinary or something, right? So anyway, I
Yeah.
think like the point being, I think that that's maybe like, if we were to try to analyze something, that's the first step. Like, well, what are they trying to accomplish with this song?
Yeah.
Um, so with that said, coming back around, so Tender Surrender is your number four. Why?
Uh-huh.
Can you explain why
Yeah, 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 yeah.
in comparison to the other three?
Yeah. So to me, can kind of going back to what I was mentioning earlier, I just don't connect with that song. And I like I would say Again, going back to me being a very vibe-like person,
Hmm.
I think Sandstorm, Bad, and Strobe are all very vibey songs. Tender Surrender, not so much.
Right.
Um, and I think that's really what it comes down to. I don't enjoy Tender Surrender as much. Like,
Hmm.
which is it's not bad. Like it's like Steve Vai does a lot of incredible things on that song.
But it's not
Um,
something that is resonating with you.
right. Yeah. I think that's a song that like I would want to sit down and like really analyze, not something I could sit down in my car driving to work and like get everything out of it, you know?
Yeah.
You got to pay attention to it.
So,
Um,
how would you compare that to say, like, again, I know we bring up Avenged Sevenfold all the time, but uh, like Life is But a Dream. I was talking with my singer about Life is But a Dream after he came out, and he said that he liked it, but one of the things that he didn't like was that he couldn't like listen to it while he was doing other stuff because of how jarring that album is. Um, and I think it's safe to say that that album in general is not really like a vibe album. Um,
um,
uh, how would you compare Tender Surrender to maybe some of those songs on Life is But
yeah,
a Dream?
I think the biggest difference for me here in this specific scenario is um I've listened to Life About a Dream so many times now. Like since it when it came out,
Yeah,
the year it came out in June, I almost listened to that album 1,000 times for the end of the year, according to my iTunes.
yeah, I was up there, maybe not 1,000, but I listened to that album like
Um,
crazy too.
and like I did study all of those songs. So in the same way that I agree it is the more jarring album, but then I think it's the flow of the vibe and how it changes.
Hmm.
Um, because like I think the most jarring part is like the ego death half of the album,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, yeah.
Um,
So, okay, this brings up an interesting question to me, which is if it's if you have a song, let's say like Tender Surrender. I think we talked about this a long time ago, but it's like the intellectual side of music and then like the emotional side of music. And I
yeah,
think when we talk about vibes, a lot of time that's the emotional side. That's like,
yeah, for sure.
what does this music make me feel? And then there's this other side, and this is maybe what we talk like, when we talk about like pushing boundaries or like expanding your mind, it's like the intellectual side is like, what do I learn from this music? Or like, what is this music teaching me? To an extent, right? And
Mhm,
so like maybe for me as a guitarist, I remember listening to Tender Surrender and it blew my fucking mind. Like that shit was crazy. And I think it's because maybe there's an element of like it was educational to me. It showed me what the
right,
guitar is capable of. And I don't listen to that song all the time, but I still love going back and listening to it and listening to how it progresses and how there's like these little slight tone changes that he makes to get it
right,
to crescendo up to this just absolutely, blistering solo, right? Like that to me was almost like it taught me, holy shit, like the guitar is capable of so many things. And that's one of the reasons why that song stuck with me for so long. Do you
right,
think now that could be said specifically for guitar, right? But do you think
right.
that there's that element of like songs that can do that, as a whole? And that's where I think that's where Life is But a Dream would come in. Like songs that teach you about, yourself to a degree and like you learn from them.
Um,
Because okay, maybe let me phrase it like this: like when you have a great work of art, part of like what great works of art are meant to do is to expose you to a perspective or I wouldn't say an emotion, but like a perspective or an experience that you maybe had not conceived of before. You know,
Right,
I've explained Avenged Sevenfold to a few people sometime, or I've explained Avenged Sevenfold to people, and what I've told them is that a lot of times they create what you didn't realize you wanted. And so, like, I would have never expected them to write an album about space and like galaxies and shit. And then they made the
right.
stage, and that was my all-time favorite album, you know? So it's like, I think that there's something about great works of art that does that, right? Like a great painting can kind of evoke that, or a great movie. Like if you watch just a phenomenal movie and you're like, wow, like it really makes you think. Like you actually sit back and you think about that experience and those characters. And I think that when we talk about like, okay, there's that emotional side of music, which is like the vibe of it, but then there's that an intellectual side of music. That's that's what I'm talking about, is that part of it where it shows you something that you didn't know before, or that you didn't
I
consciously know
don't
before.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever listened to a song and thought I've learned something about myself specifically from that song.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. Um,
What did
like,
you so when we finished listening to Life is But a Dream, one of the things you said was like this album deserves a Grammy.
yeah, it does.
So what do you remember, like what was going through your head with that? Like,
I think it's that album's ability because it tells a story and it talks about a lot of dark things that
right.
are, you know,
Very
pretty,
serious album.
very serious, pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Um, think it's the way that the stories are told and or discussed. Um,
So
and the emotions that album well, I'm gonna say specifically evoked from me, but I assume evoke is evoked for a lot of people that sit down and really listen to it.
yeah, I think so. To me that album was like a painting. I mean, it was so vivid, and the story that it told was so, uh detailed and immense and grand, but also kind of like personal.
Yeah,
um and so I think what was interesting when I finished that album was I was like, wow, like I remember thinking like it's been so long since I've heard music like this, and it's been
yeah.
so long since I've experienced like songs that you know were made like this and flowed like this, and it was something that I felt like was such a breath of fresh air compared to other songs and music. Maybe me saying like learning about yourself is not the right way to phrase it, but like, do you get what I mean? Like when you watch a great movie and it's like, wow, like that was a perspective, like it actually makes you think and you want to analyze it and you want to understand every part of it because it's actually like awoken something within you, like
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think that's more of what I mean, where it's like, wow, that was great. Like that was a great artistic experience. And I want
Yeah.
to break down why it was great and why I liked it.
Well,
Right.
that statement I can get behind a lot more.
Okay, I think that's maybe more of what I mean. But to me, that is kind of learning a little bit about yourself in a way. Because to me, that's like, okay, I've experienced this great work of art and it's really impacted me or affected me in a certain way, and I want to understand why. Does that make sense? And so
Uh,
that's why we break it down, or that's why we want to go and explore it and read all the lyrics and everything. You might not consciously think what I said there, but I think that that's why we do it, is because we're trying to understand like this work of art that affected us.
yeah, I think the hard part I have with that, and this might just be on a case by case basis, is the why, you know.
Hmm.
Um, I think for me, listening to Life is But a Dream is more so, um, just being faced with some realities, right?
Hmm.
Um, which I think, my career specifically, I was talking to my father-in-law earlier today actually, and I have a career in which I am constantly humbled by because I deal with a lot of really happy stuff, but also a lot of really sad stuff.
Yeah.
And um, I don't think music, no, I don't want to say that. I had not listened to music in a while that I think kind of, in a sense, just kept it real. Um,
Yeah.
and even that sounds bad. Um,
Well,
because I
that
think music in general does kind of keep it real, but like with such somber tones, at least.
well, it's funny you say that because I think that's where we get into like the different presentations of themes. Like there's a million songs out there. There are many songs out there that deal with the same themes that Life is But a Dream deals with. Like themes
Yeah,
like depression, existentialism, suicide, ego, all of that, right? But it's about how you do it and how you present it, right? And I think that that's how you can, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about last week about like that's what's so important. You can have a great theme, but if you don't present it in a way that's artistic and creative, it can, it's not going to be as good as something that does. um
yeah.
I know we've gone on a little bit of a tangent here with Life is But a Dream. If anybody listening to this podcast hasn't listened to that album, you got to go listen to it. It's so good. It's weird. The first time you listen to it, you're going to be like, what is this? But stick with it, listen to it some more, try to understand it. It really is that good of an album. I want to kind of bring us back over to our instrumental stuff. Um, I think the big point that I was getting at with that whole discussion and where we were like, we were going down that rabbit hole was you have this element of like music can there is this such a thing as like music that you study and that you explore and like because it shows you something that maybe you didn't or like you said that you had been craving or that you hadn't heard. There's a refreshing element, right? And I think that that's the intellectual side. I think that's the main point that I wanted to make. What do you think about that?
Um, yeah, I think, um, I think, I think it's hard to say for sure. Like
Mm-hmm.
the vast majority of my musical listenings, like I couldn't tell you the last time I sat down and listened to an album the same way that I did Life is But a Dream when it came out. I just don't have the time to do that. And maybe that's something I should make a point to do more of
So
and see how my perspective changes on some things musically.
So I'll tell you, anytime an album comes out from an artist that I care about, I do the exact same thing that I did. I have like lights and stuff in my studio. I
Yeah,
set them to the colors and the vibes of the album. I turn all the lights off. I get myself like a sandwich or something, and then I just sit and focus and listen to the music. Um,
right.
I just did that with the Eminem song, and it was amazing. It was such a great experience. Or the Eminem album. I would recommend it because I think it helps you focus in on what it on because you got to remember like those artists, especially the ones that are good, like the ones who care, like Avenged Sevenfold and Eminem, they're sitting in that studio hyper fixated on all those songs for years sometimes, and I think that you know for me personally, giving them that same respect whenever I listen to it, it's always been rewarding for me. I've never felt like I've done that and it's been like a waste. It always enhances the album. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can get behind that.
Well, so let's let's take a 30,000 foot view real quick. So we're talking about
Uh,
instrumental music. We're talking about these different styles, and I think the conclusion we're coming to here. well, at least the conclusion that I've kind of come to is that there is like, if we're going to try to analyze or, rank songs or something, I think one of the things that you do is you rank it based on what it is and what it's trying to be. Um, I would call it like the purpose of the song, not necessarily the genre. And I think that's maybe like a starting point for beginning to analyze a song. Um, but then you have these different types of instrumental songs, right? That evoke different things or vibe or don't vibe. Um, we haven't really talked about Bad. What'd you think of Bad?
Um, so I mean I enjoy Bad. It's not my favorite Polyphia song.
Yeah,
Um, to kind of at least speak to, I think we should try and like wrap it up in about 15 minutes or so. But
yeah, yeah.
my theoretical list I think would be Strobe, Sandstorm, Bad. Um, maybe it's hard to know where I'd put Bad versus Sandstorm. So what I like Bad over Tender Surrender is that I just think it's a lot easier to vibe with as a song. I would argue that a lot of Polyphia stuff, um, which to my knowledge I'm not super familiar with the Polyphia discography, um,
Hmm.
but the things they do with their instruments almost make them sound not instrumenty,
Yeah,
in certain things. So it's kind of like something that I think kind of has its foot or its toes in two different pools, right? Because of
yeah.
their I don't know what word to use. The way they play their instruments. There's probably a better way to say that, but
They're so
um
unorthodox. Like,
yeah, yeah.
he's not. They're definitely
Um
not playing guitar the way that it's been played, you know,
right.
or was has
Um
been played in decades past.
yeah. So I think they're pushing envelopes, which I like and I enjoy and appreciate that because I don't think I've ever heard anybody play the guitar like his name's Tim, right?
Yeah,
Tom,
Tim
Tim.
Henson.
Yeah. Like that man. That guy's nuts. Outside of the animals as leaders, dude, Tony Abasi, something like
Uh,
that.
oh my God, Tosin Abasi.
Tosin Abasi, yeah.
Yeah,
Um, he's the only other person I can think of off the top of my head,
right.
um, who can come close to that. Um,
Yeah, the
and
two of them are nuts. You should check out Manuel Gardner Fernandez. He plays for the band Unprocessed,
uh-huh,
and then Ichika Nito. That's his name. And Marson. Those are like the big guys. I can send you a list. But anyway,
yeah.
sorry. What were you saying?
No, 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 you're good. So I think um I think I appreciate it because it's just a little bit easier to vibe with. It is
Yeah.
kind of it is a weird song.
Yeah.
Um, and I would say jarring in some spots, but it's kind of the jarring that I vibe with in a weird way.
So right. And so I think one of the reasons I picked it was because we talk about like, I think we should dive in maybe on another episode. Well, definitely on another episode, like dive into like vibes and what is a vibe and what is that? Because we've used that word a lot, and I would like, I think it's worth exploring. But one of the
Mhm,
reasons why I picked that song is because last week we were talking about like, we were speaking about boundary pushing music and challenging music, and even like I was saying, like in my opinion, better music, like more substantial music, and then like vibing music, as if they were things that couldn't coexist, as if they were like those were opposites. And
right.
I don't think that they are. And I think that's one of the reasons I brought up Dido. But even Dido, I think is much more whatever word you want to use, vibing, crowd pleasing, whatever, than Bad was. Whereas I think Bad is absolutely a song that you can vibe to. I vibe to it all the time, but it is 100% a boundary pushing, progressive, weird song. And I think that the fact that they mixed those two is a testament to Polyphia's skill as musicians. And
Yeah,
so like when I talk about like I think the best musicians can, accomplish, it's funny, right? It's like now that I'm saying it, it's like maybe this is part of it. Maybe this is something we should explore is like what if the best artists are the ones who can find that balance between like vibing and also like boundary pushing and intellectualism, right? Because I
yeah,
wouldn't say that Polyphia is as like progressive or proggy as like Dream Theater or Oingo Boingo or something, right? But they're still like, but they still are progressive. But they're definitely like more mainstreamish and vibey, like we say, as more vibey and mainstreamish than those progressive bands. Because you can't, I
yeah,
like you can vibe. Well, you can vibe to like sections of Dream Theater songs because they're all like 9 minutes long.
yeah.
So maybe that's something to explore. Is like, what is a vibe? Like, what does it mean to vibe? You know what's funny? Actually, I'm gonna say this right now. I think that that's probably gonna be related. Fuck it, it's my podcast. I can spoil it. We're gonna talk about drums. We're gonna talk about the science of drums in a future
Maybe
episode.
not drums, but percussion.
Percussion, right? And I think that percussion, like when you think about like a drum beat and humans dancing, like tribal humans dancing around a fire to percussive beats, right? I think that's something that's very human. And I think that that is actually very directly related to vibes. And
Yeah,
so it's funny because like you and I have spoken about vibes and you even
yeah.
mentioned earlier like you prefer the vibey side of music. And it's funny because it's not even that I'm against it. Like, I don't, that's why I like Polyphia, is because their music actually sounds not normal, but it's like an enjoyable song to listen to. It's pleasing to the ear as opposed to constantly trying to mess with you and like throw you off kilter, like with 7, 8 beats and 14, 16 beats and shit. Like shit that just doesn't make sense, right? That's funny. A 14, 18 beat is the same as or a 14, 16 beat is the same as a 7, 8 beat. Um, anyway, but the point being is like, I think that there's something deep that you could explore there. Like, what is a vibe? And I think it's related to percussion because you think about like, well, maybe I think it's somewhat related. I think that would be a good jumping off point to talk about vibes. It's like how does percussion weigh into that, and like a beat and drums, you know?
Mm,
But that's for another episode. I think the main thing that I was saying though is that I don't think that those two things like boundary pushing or uh challenging music or even like intellectual or in my like I said, I use the word better. I actually think it's better. I think music that, you know, can present its themes in a smarter way, that is not that does not conflict with vibes, right? Like if we're talking about like objective measurements of quality, I don't think that that conflicts. I don't know. What do you think?
I wouldn't. My gut answer is no, because I think you have to vibe probably in some capacity to be a good song, probably.
Is there a song that has no vibe?
Not that I can think of at this moment.
We should think about that. We should think, is that even like possible? Can you have a song with no vibe that you just can't like you can't just like listen to it? Like it's just all over the place. And I think the deeper question is if the song has no vibe, is it a good song?
Right.
Or can it
I'd
be a
have
good
to
song?
I'd have to do some thinking on that.
Yeah. I think that's something to explore. You know, something to think about. I know it's funny because I don't think this episode turned out quite like I expected it to.
Do
Um,
they ever though?
no, they don't. But I think we touched on some good stuff. I think we kind of
Yeah,
we definitely got in there a bit. It's interesting, right? Like thinking about instrumental music and what it means, and I don't know. Maybe we're. It's funny because this is also, like I said, this has been a crazy week, and I'm a little tired myself. I'm a little fatigued, but so I feel like I've been a little more loopy in this episode than usual. Um, but there's just a lot to talk about. Anyway, I sound like a fucking hippie now. Anyway, I think it's probably time to call it.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I hope y'all enjoyed it. Definitely, this is like a cerebral episode. This is very like we had lots of pauses and we're thinking deeply about deep topics. Definitely something for us to pick up on, next week. But cool. I think my ranking would be Bad, Tender Surrender, Strobe, and then Darude.
Yeah.
Sandstorm. I think that'd be mine. I think Bad. I like Bad the most because it captures both. Like it's a very boundary pushing
Yeah.
song, but it is like it is enjoyable to listen to frequently. Um,
Yeah.
I think Tender Surrender. It is a masterclass in like what the guitar is capable of, and it just has these great
Hmm.
movements, and like the actual changes from section to section are so fluid. Like you almost don't even notice them when they're happening, but they do happen, and I think that's really cool. um I think that Strobe is super epic, very vibey, but I will be honest, I think I was a little bit underwhelmed with some of the rhythms. I think they got a little repetitive. And I think that there could have been more changes that were implemented throughout that song, and like more could have been done. But also, I understand why he made it the way he made it. It is supposed to be kind
Yeah.
of relaxing. And I think Sandstorm's really fun, but it's a really well made song for sure. But I just don't think it's quite as impressive as the other three. So
Yeah.
there we go.
I can get behind that.
We did it. We ranked them.
Done
Um,
did it.
all right, cool. Let's call it there. What do you have a factor? You want me to give a
Uh,
fact?
I mean, the only thing my closing comment would be is go listen to "Life Is But a Dream" by
Yeah, for real.
Sevenfold.
We gotta.
um,
Maybe we should pick one of those songs and just get it out of the way. I feel like that
uh,
album though is just so good. It,
it's
it's
so good.
it's and it is just such a peak pinnacle of musicianship. It's hard to like
Yeah,
it's hard to talk about great music and not talk about that album or the
the whole
stage.
work.
Like it
Yeah,
it's just not it's just hard to not bring those up. They're so good. And I just always find it funny that you and I can agree on that, and then but then like we've
yeah.
always agreed on
Guns
Avenged
N'
Sevenfold,
Roses, trash.
right? Fucking Dead Mouse, trash. Not Dead Mouse, trash. It's just funny. It's like when we it's like, okay, what's the best album? Life is But a Dream. Cool. All right, what's like the fifth best album? There is no agreement happening there. Like
Yeah,
there is
yeah.
no agreement, which is funny. Cool. All right. Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good factoid to leave on. Go listen to Life is But a Dream. Um, Sweet. All right. You ready?
Yep.
Wale!